friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today for a new series I'm going to be starting because it was a special request. And I thought, you know what a great idea. So I'm going to be putting together the list of the very basic essentials that I like to keep in stock, like a food storage or whatever storage, to get us through hard times or just to make life more convenient because they're always just right there. And today is going to be about baking essentials. So this is going to be for anything related to making pastries, breads, and so on. And so just the basic essentials plus a few other things that I like to make sure I always have on hand. So obviously the first one on that list is going to be flours and grains for making flours. And just so you know right off the bat, most of the stuff that I get now is from Azure Standard. I get all organic, non-GMO grains and whatnot that I can from there. So as far as flours go, I stock up on a good unbleached white flour, again, organic. And then I also like to keep in stock flours for making gluten-free goods for our friends who need to be gluten-free. So that would be buckwheat flour and brown rice flour. And then also to add to that, I also use the tapioca starch and the potato starch, and I can get all of that from Azure Standard. But the great thing about the tapioca starch is that can be used in anything that you need a starchy ingredient. It's organic, it's corn-free, if you're trying to avoid corn or any other types of grains like that. So, and then, arrowroot powder is another one that can do that. So can kudzu powder. You can use those all in the same way because they're all the same type of starch that are very similar to cornstarch without it coming from corn. Now, the other thing I store for flour are whole grains because I do have a grain mill. So whenever you're storing up whole grains to be able to grind up into flour, you also need to make sure you have a grain mill. Now, I used to highly recommend the Country Living Grain Mill, which I still highly recommend, and I still love mine. However, the price is far more expensive. It was expensive when I bought it a number of years ago. It's far more expensive now. I love the fact that it's US made right here in Washington State, but it's to the point where a lot of people wouldn't be able to afford it at all. So you might want to do a little shopping around for a good grain mill. I've heard good things about Wonder Mill. They have an electric version as well as a hand crank version. And I know there's other kinds out there, and I do ask that anybody, please, if you have a grain mill and you love it, please share with us down below what that is. Maybe you found one that was a lot more affordable than the one I have. But either way, if you're going to store whole grains for making flours, you have to have a way to mill it up. Some people even use their Vitamix. If you already have a Vitamix, you can use that to grind your grains into flour. So that might be a one-stop, do everything kind of thing for you there. And anyway, so back to the grains, my favorites to store for just regular breads are hulled barley and hard white wheat. Sometimes I'll also have spelt. I have some rye as well. And then the other thing I keep on hand is whole corn, organic and non-GMO, of course, and then we grind that up for a corn meal. I stock up on white because when I'm doing what I call the Tar Heel beans and cornbread, I use white cornmeal for that. And so that's why I always keep white corn on hand. And then when my jar gets empty, we'll switch out the auger from the regular grain auger to the bean and corn auger, and then I'll grind up a whole bunch of cornmeal and then keep it in my jars, the bale wire jars that you can get, like the Fido jars. And then when that gets empty, then I'll grind up a bunch more. Because otherwise, because you got to change out the auger on the Country Living Grain Mill for that. And I have Patrick do it because I don't know how to do it. It's not that hard. It's just another step you got to take. And then, of course, I have various different leavening agents. I have my own homemade fermentation starter that can be used for making bread, and I've done it many times. I've made just regular loaf bread. I've made pizza crust and something else. something else with it. I can't remember. I don't do it very often because I do tend to prefer to use a good dry yeast. And so I do keep a lot of that on hand, which if you wonder how I store it, usually when you buy yeast by the pound or 5-pound bags, they're already in vacuum sealed bags that will last for a very long time, especially if you keep it in a cooler storage pantry or keep it in the freezer. I just keep it in our pantry where it stays pretty cool most of the year. And then when I open that up, I'll divide it up into smaller jars, vacuum seal them. Then what I do is I'll keep one jar in the freezer so I don't have to keep vacuum sealing it between uses. And then I'll just work out of that one. And when I finish that one off, then I'll start a new jar and keep that in the freezer. Then once I empty out all those jars, I'll open up another bag and start over. So that works out really well for me. So I do keep a lot of that kind of yeast in stock. And then also I have the knowledge of how to not only work with sourdough bread, but to make my own sourdough starter. I don't keep a starter on hand all the time, and I haven't for years, but years ago I made sure I knew how to make one from scratch because anyone can do it. And then from there, worked with making different types of breads. Now, it's not my personal favorite. Sourdough's nice on occasion, yes, and I might get back into it someday, but it is a skill that people need to learn, even if it's not something you would normally use for making your breads. So if you'd like more information on the fermentation starter, which can be made from anything, as long as you have some water, some organic cane sugar or honey, and whatever kind of herb or fruit or even vegetable that you have on hand, even if it's just scraps or even peels, just like you would with vinegar. The process is very similar. The difference is it's ready in 3 days to use, where vinegar takes a month. And then the other leavening agent would be baking powder, but I don't stock up on baking powder. But instead, I stock up on the two main ingredients that you use to make baking powder, and I don't even mix them anymore. And that is cream of tartar and baking soda. Just those two things is all you need to make baking powder. So instead of pre-mixing it, which can cause it to go bad, you know, because the one is a base and one is an acid, and mixing them together can cause them, when I say bad, it can make them, you know, the two can eventually over time cancel each other out, and then they can also clump together, which is why a lot of times aluminum is added to baking powder. It's a drying agent, keeps it from clumping. Now they add other things like cornstarch or something else as a drying agent, but I just find it easier and more cost effective to just keep them separate. So I even have 2 different jars here, one for baking soda and one for cream of tartar, and I just use a little out of each at a time. Now, typically, I always forget the ratio, 2 teaspoons of one and 1 teaspoon of the other, and now I forget. I have a video on this I'll link to down below if you'd like to learn more, but what I usually do is just use equal parts of each. So if it's something that needs a tablespoon of baking powder, I would use a half tablespoon of each and just throw it in there. That way I don't have to think about it and remember which I need how much of, because it works just as good that way. And then you're going to want to make sure you have some kind of fats, your favorite fats to use in whatever baking you do. So my favorites to have on hand would be, as far as oils go, is going to be olive oil, which is going to be more for using in, which I like to use when I'm making pizza crust or more Italian type breads. That's going to be the fat that I'm going to add to the bread. Avocado oil is also one of my other favorites. It doesn't have any flavor to it, whereas the olive oil is going to add a nice flavor when you're wanting that more Italian flavor in there. But mostly in a lot of my baked goods, I'm using butter as a fat and or palm shortening, which I get that from Vitacost. They carry an organic one. It's not cheap, but I typically will mix the butter and the palm shortening in amounts of half and half when I'm making biscuits, pie crusts, and the like. And then of course, coconut oil. Let us not forget coconut oil. That gets used quite a bit in many different things. So cooking, baking, and more. Then you've got your salts. So my 2 favorites I keep stocked up on are a Himalayan pink salt and the Redmond real salt. Now, just understand, Redmond real salt, the nice thing about that is mined here in the US. Both of them have a lot more minerals than any of your stripped out salts that you typically are going to buy at the store. And anyway, those are the two main ones I keep stocked up on, but Redmond Real can sometimes have a little bit of grittiness to it. So I tend to use that a little different way than I use the Himalayan salt. The Redmond Real is a better one to use when you're using it in canning, because any of that grittiness and minerals is going to sink to the bottom of the jar. Whereas when you're mixing it in with baked goods, sometimes you can get that crunch, and I personally don't like that. But it is a good salt, and that crunch isn't going to hurt you. It's more that just uncomfortable feeling of crunching on something gritty like that. And then for sugars, I always keep a good organic cane sugar in the blonde color. It's going to still have some of the minerals remaining in it. Always have some good raw honey. Again, these are all things I now get from Azure Standard, molasses, and maple syrup. So those are the 4 main sugars I always keep on hand. And then I can make my own brown sugar or powdered sugar out of the cane sugar. And for the brown sugar, you just need the cane sugar and the molasses. And then for the powdered sugar, you just need the sugar and then some kind of starch like the tapioca, the arrowroot, the kudzu, that you add in there, and that helps keep it fluffy as you're processing it up in your blender or whatever else to turn it into a powder. And I find I like it better than the store-bought when I do that. Same thing with the brown sugar. And yes, I have videos on both of those. I'll link to those down below. If I remember all these videos, I'm probably going to forget a bunch of them. So if you don't see them linked in the description box, which you got to click on more or show more to open it, let me know and I'll make sure it gets in there. And then some other things is a lot of your baked goods, you need eggs. So there's different types of like pancakes and whatnot that you need to have eggs on hand. So for us, well, we have chickens. That's our egg supply. But in a lot of my baked goods, like for making pumpkin pies and whatnot, I also have eggs that I dehydrated from our own chickens, which I never need to use actually, because I always have some kind of eggs on hand that are fresh anymore, but I have them whenever I need them. In fact, I'm probably going to start working through them. They're great for scrambled egg. Have a video on how I do it. I dehydrate them raw so that I can keep them raw, so they'll work better for baking, and they taste better when you whip them up into a scrambled egg as well, than starting with eggs that were cooked and then dehydrated. And you don't want to put a cooked egg into your baked goods. It's not going to work as well. This is why I keep them raw, so I can add it to pancake mixes and like I said, pumpkin pies and anything else like that I need eggs in. So, but for making mayonnaise, raw eggs, fresh raw eggs are the best. So I got to have those eggs on hand. But there are other methods to put up your eggs if you want to keep them raw, where you can use them like that for various things. Like the water glass method is a popular method. I would highly recommend going with the lime water method instead of using the water glass, since water glass itself is a chemical that can be toxic. And I would get concerned about that getting into the egg itself, even though it's been done for many, many, many years. And then obviously, if you have a garden, try to grow things that would be good for making pies and crisps and other kinds of desserts. Turnovers, I have videos on a lot of these things. And, or whatever you got growing wild around you. Like around here, we don't really even have to try to grow blackberries. Blackberries around here, in fact, some of the best tasting blackberries that there are, grow wild here. In fact, on our other piece of property just down the road, we've allowed blackberries to kind of fill in certain areas, so they're there for us and we can just go pick them whenever they're ripe. So we get the tiny wild blackberries out there, as well as the Himalayan blackberries, which are my 2 favorites. And we're also trying to grow raspberries out there as well as here. And then I also grow currants, apples, and blueberries. And so always having something I can make some yummy treats with. And then let's not forget spices. Spices you need all the way across the board. And you can be baking things that you want savory flavors in, or if it's desserts, obviously flavors that go well with sweet things. I'm just going to read off some examples, but I have much, much more than this. So that'd be like cinnamon, cloves, ginger, nutmeg, paprika, cayenne, black pepper, red pepper, chili powder, cumin, and the list goes on and on. So whatever your favorite spices are, so a lot of this stuff is things you can add to your baked goods. You know, like let's say you're making pizza. You make your pizza crust. You're still gonna want your spices for your sauce and everything else you're putting on there. Or if you're making, maybe you want to make a bread where you're adding rosemary to it. So you might want to have some good tasty herbs that you would like to add to your baked goods. And whatever you can grow, obviously, is going to help save you money as well. And it'll be something you always have on hand. And then some extras that you might want to consider. Obviously, these aren't the essentials, but these are extras I like to use in baking because they add more nutrition to the baked goods. I have 5 that I like to use on a regular basis. I use Nigella sativa, also known as black seed. That one doesn't go in all my baked goods because of its flavor. It's something I typically save for things that I'm going to want a more savory flavor in. So maybe my pizza crust or dinner rolls or just my regular loaf bread that I'm going to make. And then the other seeds that I'll use in any of them would be poppy seed, hemp seed, flax seed, and chia seed. And there's other seeds you can use too, but those are my 5 favorites to add to my different baked goods. It doesn't matter if it's pancakes, biscuits, or whatever. And then the other thing would be, it might not be an extra for you, it might be a necessary for you, especially if you need to be grain-free and or you're vegan. And you like to keep a lot of nuts on hand for that protein or for making your own different dairy-free milks. So I sometimes will make Brazil nut milk or Brazil and hazelnut or almond milk or coconut milk. A couple of my favorites are a pecan cashew, makes a really great milk. And then, like I said, the Brazil and hazelnut blend, those are my favorites. But here's the added benefit of that is you're going to have pulp remaining. Once you get as much liquid out of that pulp as you can, that can then be used either immediately in baked goods such as muffins and pancakes or even cookies. I almost forgot about cookies. There's another great baked good that you can also use the dehydrated eggs in. You can also dry it up and then powder it even more fine in your blender and then use it as a flour. It's not going to work great alone in all things, but it does, you can use it for making pancakes. You just have to add extra eggs, or if you're vegan, obviously some other kind of binder such as chia seed and flaxseed that has also been ground and maybe soaked for a little bit, so it can have that consistency of an egg to help hold it together. But those do make delicious pancakes, or you can at least add those as a partial flour replacement to again add more nutrition and more protein and even more flavor. Now I feel pretty certain there's some basics I've probably forgotten, but that's what I have right here. I'm going to try to remember to type this up and then put it on Patreon for free and then provide that link. So remember, I'm saying free because all of my posts on Patreon, you don't have to pay any monthly subscription fees to be able to see what I have there. Though you might have to ask me specifically for a link because they've changed things a little bit where you can only scroll so far. And you can't always find all the posts. You might be able to still do a search. But anyway, I'll type that up and I'll put it in a separate link that I'll pin down below. That way it's something I can easily find and go add to if I need to. And yeah, so that might make it easier. Then you can just copy and paste that instead of having to take notes all the way through the video. If you haven't already. So anyway, please share your thoughts and ideas down below. What are some of your favorite basic essentials that you like to stock up on for your baked goods? So again, this is like breads, cookies, pies, pastries, and so on. And I hope you enjoyed this video and be watching for more of these coming out in the near future. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.